Hello, everyone. I'm David Elwood. I'm Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. This is truly an exciting and memorable night, as the size of the audience demonstrates. I only have one request. In deference to the size of the audience and everybody else, please turn off your cell phones. So from that, let me move forward. Now, this is this day, this event, this award and this talk is one of the high points of the year. But another high point right now is the presence of Walter Shorenstein, who has joined us here. He is the support. You stay, please, Walter. All right. It is his support for the Shorenstein Center that makes all of this possible, and we have had a remarkable journey together, Walter and his family and this school, and it is an enormous pleasure and honor to have him here. He comes all the way from the West Coast, and that's a challenge these days. Obviously, we're here to celebrate the David Nyan Prize and to host the Teddy White Lecture. And these are two of the most prominent activities of the school during the course of any given year. And therefore, I don't get to do anything other than just introduce the introducer. And so let me now introduce the introducer. And it's actually an enormous pleasure to be joined by Alex Jones, who has been for a number of years the head of the Center on Press and Politics, though on leave this year. And it's also a great pleasure to be joined by his wife, Susan. And we're thrilled to have both of you here. It's a great day. He is Alex Jones, that is, a very accomplished journalist. He has worked for the New York Times for quite some time, and from 1983 to 1992, and he received the Pulitzer Prize. Now, he did mention to me at one small classroom he was once introduced as having won the Nobel Prize. So it's clear that his sights remain high, but he's done terrific work. He's also the co-author of several highly acclaimed books, including one co-authored with his wife Susan Tift, The Private and the Powerful Family Behind the New York Times. But most importantly, under his leadership, the Shorenstein Center has thrived and will continue to thrive. So with no further ado, let me turn this podium over to Alex Jones, who will handle the ceremonies from here on out. Alex, welcome.
I was telling David about a time when Susan and I were guest teaching at a little college called Davis and Elkins College in a little town in West Virginia. And the local elementary school learned that I had won a prize and wanted me to come talk to the 8th grade class. So I was glad to do it. I went over and walked into the library, and the teacher dutifully sort of marched this group of kind of completely uninterested 8th graders in. And they were kind of looking at me, and I was looking at them, and the teacher rather nervously said, "We are very, very proud to have as our guest today Alex Jones, winner of the Nobel Prize." I did not correct her. As David said, each year this night is one of the great ones for the Shorenstein Center. As some of you may know, the Shorenstein Center was created more than 20 years ago as a memorial to Joan Shorenstein, a truly remarkable television journalist who died far too young of breast cancer. Her father, Walter Shorenstein, who you have met already, endowed the center as a place for the focused and searching examination of the intersection of press, politics, and public policy. Walter Shorenstein not only made the center possible, but he's remained vitally interested in what we do and has been our unstinting supporter and friend. He's here tonight, and I want to, like David, thank you, Walter, for your support. A bit later, you'll hear from Maureen Dowd, our Theodore White lecturer for 2007. But first, I have another task to perform, which is an honor, but a bittersweet one. In 2005, we at the Shorenstein Center lost a great and much admired friend, David Nyan, when he died unexpectedly. Many of you knew David well. Some of you did not. And I want to speak of him as we this year bestow the third annual David Nyan Prize for Political Journalism. David Nyan was a man of many parts, a devoted family man, a beloved friend, always a boon companion. He was also a Red Sox fan and would almost certainly have skipped the dinner tonight honoring the winner of the prize that bears his name to be at Fenway. He was a big, handsome man with a killer smile, Irish eyes, and the rare power to light up a room just by walking into it. I saw him do it again and again when he was a fellow at the Shorenstein Center. But tonight we honor David Nyan, the consummate reporter and political journalist, which was the role that occupied much of his life and at which he could not be bested. David was a reporter and then a columnist for the Boston Globe, and his work had both a theme and a character. The theme was almost always power, political power, and also especially the abuse of political power by the big shots at the expense of the little guys. He loved politics, and he also loved politicians. As a group, he respected them. He felt they were often given a raw deal and were judged by a standard that was smug and pious, two things David never was. But if politics was the theme of David's work, the character of that work was a mixture of courage and righteous anger, leavened by a great sense of humor and the ability to write with grace and passion. He relished a good fight with a political figure or perspective, yet had the knack of seeing beyond the surface of issues and the baloney to the heart of things, and especially to the reality of what was going on. He was a self-avowed liberal and utterly not defensive about it. As a columnist at the Globe, he was a battler, a no-holds-barred advocate. But he was also always surprising his readers with his take on things because most of all, David Nyan was his own man, and he called them as he saw them. In his memory and honor, the Nyan family and many friends and admirers of David Nyan have endowed the Nyan Prize for Political Journalism to recognize the kind of gutsy and stylish journalism that David Nyan embodied. Dave's wife, Olivia, his children, and many members of his family are here tonight, and I would like to ask them to all please stand. This year, the David Nyan Prize for Political Journalism goes to Dana Priest from the Washington Post. Dana has worked at the Post for 15 years, and she has rocked a lot of boats with her reporting, which, taken as a whole, might be described as a deep and probing look at our military in all its variations and dimensions. She covered the Pentagon for 6 years and spent another 8 years writing exclusively about the U.S. military and the war on terror, which expanded her search into the world of clandestine intelligence. In April of 2006, Dana's outstanding investigative research and superb writing won her a Pulitzer Prize for beat reporting for a penetrating series of articles that broke the story of the clandestine interrogation facilities, black sites, secretly kept by the CIA in foreign countries. The story sparked an international debate, an examination of the U.S. government's counterterrorism measures that still continues. Even before these groundbreaking articles, her 2003 book, The Mission, Waging War and Keeping Peace with America's Military, had been recognized as a deep and timely examination of the military as a whole. It described the changing nature of the military's responsibility and influence. Joe Nye, the then dean of the Kennedy School and an expert on military affairs, called it a fascinating set of answers to important questions about America's role in today's world. And Ben Bradley, the Post's legendary executive editor who loves the kind of reporting that makes waves, called it a book that is just in time for the great new debate between the hawks and the doves. More recently, Dana's articles with Annie Hull shocked the nation with their account of the atrocious conditions wounded soldiers and veterans met at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center after returning from Iraq. The first response to their extraordinary reporting was outrage that such a thing could happen, followed by pledges from the White House that the problems of the nation's veterans hospitals would be fixed. They, of course, can't be fixed quickly. But to the extent they are fixed, it will be in no small measure because of the relentless and yet eminently fair, even compassionate coverage of Dana Priest. Dana holds a BA in political science from the University of California at Santa Cruz. So far as I understand, she has never taken a journalism course. David Nyan would, I have no doubt, offer his enthusiastic approval and admiration. Like David, Dana has called them like she's seen them, in the process exposing some of the most crucial and shocking stories of our time. Please join me in welcoming Dana Priest to the stage to accept the 3rd annual David Nyan Prize for Political Journalism.
Thank you. Well, I'm assuming it would be okay with David that actually I've turned down opportunities to cover politics as straight political reporting, because on the other side of that, on the other side of the coin, there's always this terrible abuse of power and of politics, and that's where I've always found myself. First, with the secret prisons, or not first, but recently with the secret prisons, and then with Walter Reed. Both of them have been sort of bookends in my career, and calling upon very courageous sources within the system and within the political structure to approach us and to help us write. The bittersweet story on Walter Reed is that it's by far not over. And so the role of journalism in making that right is still very, very important. So for all the young journalists out there, I say go to it. Thank you.
Theodore H. White was also a consummate reporter whose passion was politics. He came to Harvard on a newsboys scholarship and went on to a very distinguished career as a journalist and also a historian. Indeed, Teddy White, as he was universally known, changed both political journalism and politics when he wrote The Making of the President in 1960 about the Kennedy-Nixon campaign. For the first time, he raised the curtain on the sausage-making side of presidential campaigns and changed forever the candor and behind-the-scenes drama that is now at the heart of campaign coverage. He followed that first book with 3 more, Making of the President books, in 1964, 1968, and 1972. No one has yet matched those smart, groundbreaking examinations of what happens and why in the storm of a political campaign. And it is fair to say that Teddy White's heirs are the journalists of today, like Rick Burt, who's here with us tonight, I'm glad to say, from the New York Times, who try to pierce the veil of politics to understand what is happening and then to analyze and deliver the goods to those of us who are trying to understand. Before his death in 1986, Teddy White was one of the architects of what became the Shorenstein Center. One of his first moves when Marvin Cowell became director, the founding director of the Shorenstein Center, was to raise the funds and establish the Theodore H. White Lecture on the press and politics in his honor. This year, the White Lecture is to be delivered by an outspoken writer who does not like to give speeches. If that seems at all contradictory to you, then you should know that Maureen Dowd is a wealth of contradiction. She is one of the nation's most important and incisive voices on the world of politics, yet does not consider herself to be passionate about politics or even very interested in politics. She is denounced for partisanship, yet is, for as long as I have known her, someone who is genuinely nonpartisan. She is feared for her wicked tongue and biting prose, and is beloved deeply by the close circle who know her to be capable of stunning and spontaneous generosity. She travels the world as the consummate sophisticate, For instance, she was picked by Esquire magazine as one of the first to be profiled in a feature they called The Women We Love. It was not a nude spread, I can assure you. Yet she is, at a core level, the daughter in an Irish family where her brothers give her a hard time because she is mean to George Bush. The daughter of a cop who was a congressional guard and a devoted mother who would send her, frequently would send her, quantities of unsolicited advice and who adored her absolutely. She is not what a lot of people think she is, in other words. I first came to know Maureen when she and I were both new reporters at the New York Times. She'd come there from Time magazine, which didn't know what to do with her. She had gone to Time from the Washington Star and been placed in the Nation section, where the only other woman was my wife, Susan Tift. The system at Time didn't suit Maureen's talents at all. As a writer assigned a topic, she would sit at her computer and read files of reporting from corps of people who did nothing but report. She was then expected to stitch together a narrative in a very definite Time voice from their reporting. This was not Maureen. She was spotted and brought to the New York Times by a man I think is one of the true journalistic geniuses, Arthur Gelb, the managing editor, who, by the way, helped me persuade her to be here tonight and is a member of the Shorenstein Center's advisory board. Arthur recognized something very special in Maureen, and so did we all in that sprawling and jumbled and vastly exciting New York Times newsroom in the mid-1980s. We worked at very close quarters, with desks jammed against each other, a steadily rising din as deadline approached, and all the privacy and personal space of a beehive. I can remember watching Maureen as she wrote in this maelstrom. It was clear immediately that she was writing with a style and an eye that were unique. She would, unlike at Time, do her own reporting and interviewing, somehow worming the most extraordinary and often hilarious things out of people. Then, when it came time to write, she would begin with the handful of quotes that created the real structure of her pieces. Literally, she would type the quotes onto a computer screen with lots of space around them. And then, often, she would sit and sit and sit. And as she sat, she simply stared into space in what looked like a kind of trance, as she devised the language that she would use to tee up a given quote so that it had the power of a punchline. First came the eye and the reporting, then the language that was unmistakably Maureen. A few examples. From 1986, before the so-called Liberty Weekend celebrating the 210th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. David L. Wappler, the man who is bringing New York 200 Elvis Presley lookalikes and 300 jazzercise ladies, Shirley MacLaine and 850 drill team girls on a moving stage with dancing waters, 5,000 homing pigeons playing Doves of Peace, 10,000 immigrants taking the oath of citizenship by satellite in Miami's Orange Bowl, square dancing brain surgeons and physicists, and the largest fireworks show in the history of the world had a crazy idea. Here's a crazy one, the Hollywood producer putting on the 4-day, $10 million Liberty Weekend extravaganza told a colleague. What about Richard Nixon? Or this from 1990 about the elder George Bush's particular way with words. Yes, she began, the president talks funny. Yes, he gets tangled in wayward clauses and preppy adverbs, dangling predicates and galloping gerunds. And to prove it, she quoted his answer to a Knoxville, Tennessee high school student who wanted to know if President Bush would seek ideas to improve American education. I think we set out there, and I want to give credit to your governor, George McWhirter, and your former governor, Lamar Alexander. We've gotten great ideas for a national goals program in this country, from the governors who were responding to maybe the principal of your high school, for heaven's sake. Doesn't that seem like a simpler time? The language got darker for Bill Clinton, such as this lead on a column about his brutal debate with Bob Dole in 1996. There was a moment in the San Diego debate when Bob Dole actually looked as if he wanted to run and hide behind Jim Lehrer's chair. All night, Bill Clinton had been playing alpha male, throwing gorilla dust at Mr. Dole, hoping to distract his opponent from attacking on character and ethics. In a campaign that choreographs every move for maximum public approval, right down to body language, Mr. Clinton was following his strategist's in-your-face script. You looking at me, Bobster? Come over here and say that. And in the administration of George W. Bush, with the world in clear crisis, Maureen's column sometimes has a tone of urgent anxiety, and the humor is so black as to be nearly invisible. A recent column in the Times begins, "Dick Cheney's craziness used to influence foreign policy. Now it is foreign policy." She continues, "Mr. Cheney seems to enjoy giving the impression that he is loony enough to pull off an attack on Iran before leaving office, even if he has to do it alone, like Slim Pickens riding down the bomb in Dr. Strangelove, to the sentimental tunes of We'll Meet Again. He has even been referring to his nickname, Darth Vader, noting that it is one of the nicer things I've been called recently." Throughout, the voice is consistently and unmistakably Maureen's. She honed that voice, working first as a metropolitan reporter, then covering campaigns in the White House. Since 1995, Maureen has been bringing her sensibility and eye to the Times' op-ed page, in a column that made her first a scourge of the Clintons and then a scourge to George W. Bush, who has honored her with a nickname, the Cobra. What many of her critics don't get about Maureen is that her interest isn't politics so much as power, and the very human beings who wield and exercise great power. Her lethal wit and biting language are aimed without favor or prejudice at those who make decisions that affect us all, and particularly at that most powerful being, the President of the United States. In her column, Maureen serves less as political analyst than as reporter, who laces what she sees with satire and humor, or alarm. Her columns range from imagined eavesdropping on the secret interior monologues of the powerful to devastating dissections of behavior and policy that are not leavened with humor and not intended to be. Well, maybe just a little droll humor that is her hallmark. Presidents and other powerful folk don't like lancers of pretension very much. But those of us who have read Maureen over these turbulent years have found illumination in those carefully crafted, almost sculpted columns. Most op-ed columnists are advocates and partisans. Maureen is neither. Rather, she is the skeptical observer, her nose and eye alert to cant and duplicity, sanctimony and vanity, bullying and hogwash, recklessness and bluster, and that ever-present staple of power is practiced by humans, foolish and sometimes deadly ego. Maureen's column won the Pulitzer Prize for Commentary in 1999, and she is the author of two well-regarded books, Bush World, Enter at Your Own Risk, and Are Men Necessary? When Sexes Collide. She has given us the enormous gift of taking us along as she has borne witness to her time, to our time. It is my pleasure and honor to present the Theodore H. White Lecturer for 2007, Maureen Dowd.
I'm afraid I'm going to be the Marie Osmond of Harvard here and just faint. But, and I know I have to talk really fast because I've already been told I can't compete with the Red Sox. I've been anticipating this evening for quite a while. with great dread. I tried to wriggle out of coming, and if it weren't for the fact that I would do anything for Alex and my beloved friend Susan Tift and my friends Arthur Gelb and Barbara Gelb, I would have. As I told Alex, I'm not good at grand oratory and sweeping tours of the horizon. I'm more of a sniper, a tweaker, a kibitzer. I looked up kibitzer to make sure I was getting the word right, and Webster says it's someone who gives unwanted advice at a card game. Perfect. My alarm about coming to Harvard intensified when I was reading Arthur Schlesinger's memoir to review it for the Times Sunday Book Review. The one-time Harvard history professor scribbled this to himself after he visited Cambridge in 1979. The Boston visit was all right, but I left blessing my fate that I decided not to return after the Kennedy years. I don't know what is so deeply depressing about it all. Henry Adams had it right when he recalled his days as a member of the Harvard History Department. Several score of the best educated, most agreeable, and personally the most sociable people in America united in Cambridge to make a social desert that would have starved a polar bear. Schlesinger continued, I had forgotten the peculiar social gracelessness of Cambridge. In the 50s, we often entertained for visiting dignitaries. The Harvard people, instead of talking to the visitor, would ignore him, cluster among themselves, and engage in local gossip. If you guys want to ignore me, feel free. It will make me a lot less nervous. My jitters were also magnified when I read a piece in last week's New Republic by another distinguished Harvard alum, Michael Kinsley. My old friend Michael wrote, to the terrors of public speaking, the dry throat, the nervous bladder, the fear that your notes are not in your pocket, even though 2 copies were there and a third one was folded into your shoe when you checked 30 seconds ago and a minute and 30 seconds ago, the fear that no one will show up to hear you, the desperate hope that no one will show up to hear you, concern that your material will fill about 20 minutes of the hour you were expected to entertain, alarm that you'll only be halfway through that same material when your hour runs out, and the fellow in the first row starts looking exaggeratedly at his watch and making mad decapitation gestures. Mental self-abuse and visions of Alzheimer's because you cannot remember that fellow's name even though you just spent 2 hours at dinner with him and he's wearing a large badge. You cannot read the badge, which is a relief because it means that you are wearing your reading glasses, something that otherwise would also be weighing on your mind as the moment approaches. To all these and more must be added a new horror. You might be introduced by Lee Bollinger. Michael suggests that the famously cutting introduction of the Iranian dictator I'm a dinner jacket by the president of Colombia should inspire universities to end the reign of boring, bromide-filled, and vain speakers whose subtext generally is, you should try to be as wonderful as I am, but you can't. He proposed a new approach. Some wealthy Ivy League graduate could endow a speaker series called Jerks, Lame Brains, and Moral Degenerates. But for tonight, we're going to have to go old school. So you should try and be as wonderful as I am, but you can't. But certainly Dana Priest and David Nyan are absolutely wonderful and 2 of my all-time idols. And I know it's Dana, but my niece is Dana, so I get a little confused on that one. This is the 8th presidential race I've covered, always in high heels and sometimes in high dudgeon. My mom gave me a good tip when I first became a reporter. Get on the front page a lot and use the word allegedly a lot. I apprenticed under legendary political writers, including the redoubtable and rotund R.W. Apple, known to all as Johnny. On a trip to Africa with President Clinton, the first President Clinton, Johnny took me to an Indian restaurant in Uganda and bellowed a piece of advice I've always cherished. No prawns at this altitude. William Sapphire counseled me once on how to get big shots to return my calls. When their assistant asks you the reason for your call, you simply say, malfeasance. They'll call right back. Russell Baker, the wonderful Times columnist, hated his years covering Washington. He described a Washington reporter as someone content to wear out his ham, sitting in corridors, waiting for important people to lie to him. Once in the 80s, when I was caught up in some imbroglio with the campaign and the candidates' aides were trying to draw and quarter me or tar and feather me or something, Mr. Baker wrote me a lovely note to buck me up and urge me to resist pressure from political bullies. Remember, he wrote, these are all the same guys you went to high school with. I went to an all-girls school, but I got the idea. During the Paula Jones lawsuit against President Clinton, my boss, Hal Raines, edited my column one night from 700 words to 200, advising me, this is the New York Times. The New York Times does not make penis jokes. I had to explain this to Stephen Colbert last week when he wrote my column and tried to put in a joke about how when you test the waters for a presidential run, you don't want the water to be too cold because the last thing you want is to have Wolf Blitzer broadcasting from the Situation Room about your shrinky dink. He asked me if I could lobby the editors, and I said, this is the New York Times, Mr. Colbert. My best mentor in covering politics, though, was Shakespeare. Shakespeare teaches you, as they say, that power corrupts, and the absence of power corrupts absolutely. Lyndon Johnson said that the two things that made politicians more stupid than anything else are sex and envy, something the Bard knew a few centuries ago. Dick Cheney is sort of like Iago, but without the charm. He isn't Iago exactly, because Iago actually wanted to hurt Othello by exploiting his insecurities. I don't think Cheney wishes the president ill. I think he and Rummy exploited the Dauphin's insecurities because they thought bringing him along to their view on preemptive global domination was the right thing to do. They didn't want to destroy W, they wanted to destroy the 60s. It's hard to imagine that you could despise the decade that brought us the twist, Jackie Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe, and sometimes Jackie Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe doing the twist. But Cheney and Rummy were determined to turn back the clock and recoup the power they lost because of post-Watergate reforms when they ran the Ford White House. They aimed to replace moral ambivalence with moral clarity, a do-your-own-thing ethos with a my way or the highway ethos, multiculturalism and multilateralism, and anything multi with unilateralism, Vietnam asset flashbacks with a shock and awe muscularity. They claimed to be conservatives, but after 9/11, Cheney and Rummy launched two massive social engineering projects, transforming the American psyche and transforming the Middle East psyche. Cheney appealed to the Bushes because of their preference for deference. He was the ultimate courtier, loyal and leak-proof, whose Secret Service code name in the Ford years was backseat. But now he wanted to clamber into the front seat. So he crowned himself vice president, and he wanted to take along his early mentor in the Nixon years, Don Rumsfeld. Henry Kissinger called Rummy, quote, the rottenest person, unquote, he had known in government, more devious than any dictator he had ever dealt with. You know you're in trouble when Dr. Strangelove calls you Strangelovian. Two grumpy old men going barking mad in a secure undisclosed location and in a last desperate spurt of waning testosterone, blowing up the Middle East, breaking the army, and upending a half-century of American foreign policy, all at a bargain rate of $2.4 trillion. Not content with that resume of doom, Darth Vader is shaking his fist at Iran now. What could be more Shakespearean than that? Our lives are bracketed by two Bush wars against the same third-rate Iraqi dictator. The first President Bush went to war in the Gulf to demonstrate the principle that one country cannot unilaterally invade another. The second President Bush went to war in the Gulf to demonstrate the principle that one country can unilaterally invade another. That is one wacky family. You read these stories about Buddhist monks in the Himalayas whose brainwaves can actually be altered by meditation. My own unscientific survey of Washington politicians indicates that extreme fawning, giving and getting, can warp your brain. All those decades of deference to Yale cowboys clearly drove Cheney batty. And when President Bush nominated one of the devoted women in his policy harem, Harriet Miers, to the Supreme Court, he had obviously totally lost sight of the fact that doting on him did not constitute actual experience in constitutional law. Just because she sent him a lot of mash notes on cards with puppies and poems, and helped him clear brush in Crawford, and aided in brushing back questions about whether he received favorable treatment to get into the National Guard and avoid the draft, does not make up for the fact that she had never logged any time behind a bench in a black robe. Arthur Schlesinger, a man so deferential that he once put on a jacket before talking to JFK on the phone, wrote in his diary, "In retrospect, deference is bad for presidents. A democracy should not have a royal family." Now, he tells us, 7 years into the reign of the boy emperor and 1 year away from the coronation of the warrior queen. Schlesinger wrote about an America colored by the entwined political dynasties of the Roosevelts and Kennedys, or Plantagenets and Yorks. And now we have one colored by the entwined political dynasties of the Bushes and the Clintons. Once, in order to lure me down to speak at the Bush Presidential Library in Aggieland a few years ago, he waited until Barbara Bush was out of the country. Poppy Bush gave me a copy of a wacky satire he'd written. He'd picked up on the Arthurian style of a column I had done, portraying him as the old king and W as the boy king. He sprinkled the piece with words like verily, forsooth, and liege, and characters such as King Prescott of Greenwich, George of Crawford, Queen Bar, King Bill, Maid Monica, Hillary the would-be monarch, Knight Al Gore, Earl Jeb of Tallahassee, Duke Cheney, and Warrior Sulzberger. There was a lot of delicious frolicking, falconing, and scheming at the moatless court of the old warrior king, sort of like Monty Python crossed with Bertie Wooster. When I first started writing about politics for the Times, I got criticized sometimes for focusing on the person and not simply the policy. But as a student of Shakespeare and Teddy White, I always saw the person and the policy as inextricably braided. You had to know something about the person to whom you were going to entrust life and death decisions. In his '88 campaign, George H.W. Bush promised not to raise taxes. "Read my lips," he said. Then he did. In his 2000 campaign, W promised to have a humble foreign policy and not do any nation building. I guess he might get off on a technicality on that one, since we seem to be either nation creating or nation shattering. There's just too much smoke to tell yet. DNA always trumps data. LBJ's DNA led to Vietnam, as Nixon's led to Watergate, as Reagan's led to Iran-Contra, as Bill's led to Monica, as Hillary's led to her healthcare debacle, as W's led to the Iraq mess. For better and worse, presidents merge personal and policy. Reagan made a leap of faith with Gorbachev that changed the world. W looked into Putin's eyes and soul and neglected, as John McCain noted, to see the letters KGB. Reading Schlesinger's journals underscored my own experience. Politicians often behave irrationally, working against their own interests and the interests of the country they love, and resist learning lessons from history. When Schlesinger wrote about Adlai Stevenson, split between his desire to win and his desire to live up to the noble image of himself, it was hard not to think of Barack Obama. As the diarist noted, history offers ambiguous lessons because people mostly used history to justify policies they wanted to pursue for other reasons. As the Dutch historian Peter Gale said, history is an argument without end. And for W, history is an alibi without end. One Johnson aide told Schlesinger that Vietnam was all about LBJ proving his manhood, and Kissinger described a scene in 1968 in the cabinet room when Johnson harangued Robert McNamara, growling about the North Vietnamese, "How can I hit them in the nuts?" Vietnam was also about envy. LBJ was so envious of JFK's incandescence that he put aside his own sharp political instincts and wide pool of advisors to slavishly listen to misguided JFK holdovers like Robert McNamara. Just so, Iraq was about W proving his manhood and about envy. After a lifetime of trying and failing to live up to his father's resume, he gambled that invading Baghdad could be the place where he could bound past his father in the history books in one jump over the Tigris, avenging his dad and rebelling against his dad, all in the same war. Manipulated by Cheney, Rummy, and Wolfie, the malleable and incurious W ignored the possible negative consequences. He had never had to face negative consequences in his own life. Daddy's friends were always there to clean up the mess, like James Baker rushing down to Tallahassee in 2000 to pickpocket the presidency from Al Gore. If W had asked his father about Iraq or even watched Lawrence of Arabia, he might have had some pause. As one member of Bush 41's War Council said when Poppy didn't go into Baghdad, "How long would we have had to stay there to keep this regime in power? How effective would it be if it were perceived as the puppet regime of the United States military?" It gets to be a very difficult, a very nebulous, a very long, drawn-out kind of commitment, what I would describe as a quagmire. We have absolutely no interest in getting U.S. military forces involved inside Iraq. The one who offered that wise analysis was Dick Cheney, the same person who a decade later persuaded Bush Jr. that he would be a wimp if he didn't go into Baghdad. W thinks history will redeem him, and he has been summoning historians and theologians to the White House for discussions on the fate of Iraq and the nature of good and evil. When presidents have screwed up and want to console themselves, they think history will give them a second chance. It's the historical equivalent of a presidential pardon. But there are other things, morality, strategy, and security, that are more pressing than history. History is just the fanciest way possible of wanting to deny or distract attention from what's happening now. It's amazing, really, how many people who get to run the country go weird on us. Sorry. Once, during Bush 1, they got scared over at the White House about lead paint poisoning. They thought Millie the dog had it. But they should be scared about ego poisoning. Peggy Noonan said that 1600 Pennsylvania can be a satin-lined jail. It can also be a padded cell, strangely soundproof. As Schlesinger notes, there is no procedure in the Constitution for dealing with nuts. And unfortunately, the White House medical team does not include a shrink. Over cocktails, Bill Moyers told Schlesinger that President Johnson was, quote, a sick man, unquote. So much so that he and fellow Johnson aide Dick Goodwin had begun reading up on mental illness, Bill on manic depression and Dick on paranoia. JFK called Nixon, quote unquote, sick, and Schlesinger called Jimmy Carter weird because he took Adam and Eve literally and believed he had seen flying saucers. Besides going to jolly parties full of notables with his pal Teddy White, the thing Schlesinger most loved was sitting around JFK's hotel room gossiping and drinking with reporters. That world is lost. JFK and John McCain are two of the only politicians in modern history who even like talking to reporters. And reporters are now, as Alessandra Stanley and I wrote a while back for GQ, the dweebs on the bus, hardworking techno nerds who are a far cry from the raffish boys on the bus who started their days with Bloody Marys and had rules like wheels up, rings off, and you can never stay up late enough to sleep with the cocktail waitress. I think that one worked for us, that guy who said that. I quoted David Hoffman of the Washington Post in that piece, and afterwards he called me and said I had gotten the quote wrong. I didn't say I don't unwind, he told me. I said I can't unwind. Reporters today are festooned with so much fancy equipment: BlackBerries, iPods, iPhones, wireless laptops, text messaging cell phones, digital cameras, that I've actually seen them miss stories because they're more deeply engaged with the technology than the candidate. In the New Republic, Mike Crowley suggests that Fred Thompson's campaign is fizzling because 21st century type A reporters look down on the Tennesseans' lackadaisical style. Crowley defends Fred, writing, "If Thompson is as lazy as reputed, and if he's anything like me, he'd have stuck a Post-it note to his wall back in 2002 reading Saddam, ? And then never quite gotten around to invading." Which in retrospect may not have been such a bad thing. At a time when journalism is considered an endangered species, the Bushies at least have proved that our profession is more necessary than ever. The administration tried to create an alternate reality about the war and about the environment, and for a while it worked disturbingly well. They began referring to journalists as, quote, the reality-based community, unquote. Cheney and company did everything they could to kill the system of checks and balances, Mau-Mauing the press corps by acting as though any questions about their tactics on war or torture or civil liberties or wiretapping or no-bid Halliburton contracts were unpatriotic. They tried to replace the press with a Potemkin press corps, giving access only to Fox TV and other conservative outlets, secretly paying columnists like Armstrong Williams to spread the gospel, and spending hundreds of millions on self-aggrandizing propaganda, fashioned like fake newscasts with faux news anchors that were peddled to local news outlets. They took away my press pass, but gave a daily pass to a guy working for a conservative website who turned out to be a male prostitute with a far racier website. The only person who got the administration to switch off the TV from Fox was Nancy Reagan. They gave her an Air Force plane to take Ronald Reagan's body home after his state funeral, and she asked the steward to flip over to MSNBC. My son is a commentator there, she said sweetly. It's a tough time for journalism. Networks have dispensed with the voice of God anchors and now do evening news shows about diets, plastic surgery, and why Ellen was sobbing about regifting a dog. And there's a newspaper in Pasadena that has outsourced its local politics coverage to India. Don't get any ideas, Joe. Which sounds like a Borat sequel, or like the world has gotten a little too flat. Still, call me a dreamer, but I don't worry too much about journalism's future, either in terms of politicians who try to subvert it, not as long as we have Dana, and Rick, and Jill, or in terms of new technologies. I don't blog or vlog, and I belatedly got an iPod, which I still don't know how to sync up to my computer. I have great faith in the story. And I don't think in the end it really matters how we tell the story, with blogs or hieroglyphics, with a royal typewriter or a cell phone or a carrier pigeon. The important thing is the narrative, what Tom Stoppard calls the dance of time, the unconditional mutability that makes every life poignant. Whether we end up in Hillaryland or Rudyville, we just have to keep telling the story and pulling back the veil. We are, after all, living in perilous, confusing times. We only just broke out of the scary alternate reality of the Bushies, and we land in the scary alternate reality of Giuliani. If Rudy can be a Red Sox fan, anything on earth can happen. Thank you. Oh, I have to stay here.
Just a little bit longer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maureen has agreed to respond to some questions. Those of you who have questions, there are microphones here, 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 and over here. If you would line up at the mics, I would ask that you make it a question, not a statement, and try to keep it short. Yes, sir.
It's clear that there are a number of Bush haters who want to see us lose in Iraq. They like it when things go wrong. So the question for you is, Ms. Dowd, are you pulling for us to win in Iraq, or are you pulling for us to lose?
I grew up in a family of men in uniform. My dad was in World War I. He was a police officer who actually helped rescue the capital from the siege of the Puerto Rican terrorists. And my brothers were in the Coast Guard, and my mom was so patriotic that on 4th of July she would wear always red, white, and blue, but also stockings with American flags. I can't imagine a more patriotic family, and I think that I'm about as patriotic as it gets. And as Kennedy once said, you know, the best form of patriotism is challenging your government to tell the truth.
Are there other questions? I have questions if you don't. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
As you do your work, do you think of yourself, as you were describing, as a patriotic American? Do you think of yourself as a columnist on a deadline? How do you sort of see yourself in this professional role that you have, with the power of speaking, you know, through the op-ed columns pages of the New York Times?
Who is it? Frank Lyons, one of our brilliant reporters, one time had a column, and I, asked him what the column was called or something, and he said, it's called About 700 Words. When he had 700 words, that was it. Deadline can be a terrifying thing. But I think and I think Dana would agree that the last few years have been the most amazing story that I've ever covered. And I think that W and Cheney thought they were doing the right thing, but in the process of doing the right thing, they forgot something, which is, I'm going to sound like Goldie Hawn in that movie Protocol now, but it's we the people. I mean, they have to give us the truth about why we're going to war, and they didn't do that. They assumed that they knew best and that it was okay to create, even as Wolfowitz said in a Vanity Fair article, a kind of faux case that made the best case for what they wanted to do and not give us the reasons they thought, would be too much for us to digest. But that is not American. That is not the American way. So, that's where journalism is really good, because even if a lot of people are wanting to hear more about Anna Nicole Smith in Afghanistan, we can keep pressing and keep pressing.
There's a story that I think we've missed for the last 30 or 40 years, and it may be too late. A week or so ago, Tim Flannery, the Australian climate scientist, said we'd already passed the 455 parts per million greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that's supposedly the tripping point. Hansen of NASA said a year and a half ago we have maybe a decade time frame, so now we have maybe an 8-year time frame in order to initiate changes. The numbers that I've seen from sources like the oil drum indicate to me that
we need a question.
I'll have my question when I finish my premise, please.
Yep, but don't make a speech.
I'm trying not to. I'm just trying to give the background. It seems as if, according to the figures that I've seen, that peak oil was reached maybe a year or a year and a half ago. What is that narrative, and why hasn't it broken through?
Actually, I think one of the most amazing things that W and Cheney have achieved is they've helped turn the United States green, which I never thought I would see where it would become this super chic thing. And their, obstructionism and obtuseness, and Cheney's secret energy meetings where he gave away our energy policy to lobbyists and energy corporations, which was, I think, one of the most outrageous things in American history, sort of woke a lot of people up. So it could be the silver lining. And our brilliant managing editor and assistant managing editor are here, and I'm sure they'll get right on that as soon as we leave here tonight.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Steve Ander, and I'm an MPP1 here at the Kennedy School. And something that has always intrigued me is the role of entertainment in media and in role of entertainment in politics, and considering just recently Stephen Colbert, a favorite of mine, was your guest writer. A lot of people complain that the role of politics has turned into just entertainment, and that the depth and the intricate nature of politics is just getting washed over. And at the same time, Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, Bill Maher, et cetera, are incredibly popular. Do you see this current role of comedians in politics as a good thing or a bad thing? And also, do you support Stephen Colbert by letting him write your
Wow, well, the
article?
times we're not allowed to endorse, so. Well, there are many different forms of entertainment, some of which poison politics and some of which help it, I think. For instance, in Bush's convention, W. Bush's convention, he had a lot of blacks and Hispanics on stage, even though basically he was pursuing a lot of policies that might not be to their advantage. So you can, have that kind of entertainment that obfuscates, and then you can have entertainment like Colbert and Stewart that actually holds politicians to the truth. And I was telling a student here before I started that one night I had finished my column and gone past the first edition. I was watching Colbert, and he had tape of a politician saying something incredibly stupid that was on the subject I'd written about, and I ran over to the phone and was going to call the quote in. And even though it was a real piece of tape, I put the phone down and I thought, no, I can't. I'm a real columnist, and I can't start being influenced by a fake news show. But, but actually, it's fine because, he came to the Times, and our publisher was saying to him, how do you get these, clips of tape that can hold the president and other politicians accountable by showing that they said the opposite 6 months or 6 years earlier. And Colbert said, it's very simple. You get an intern, a video machine, and, I just think they're fantastic. It's analogous to Harry Potter getting kids to read. If you can get people interested in politics by putting some humor on it, great.
Hi, my name is Tyler.
And also, it's in the tradition of Jonathan Swift and Evelyn Waugh and lots of other fantastic people.
Hi, my name is Tyler Goen. I'm a junior at the college. I'm a big fan of the Times op-ed page, and I was wondering what your relationship is like with the other op-ed columnists, and sort of if you guys draw off each other's ideas, or if you talk over things with them, or sort of how it works there.
When I was on the Colbert Show, he asked me that, and I told him the story that sometimes when, very occasionally, every few years, if Tom Friedman's having a bad day, and either in terms of his own writing or the Middle East or something, he'll come into my office very distraught, and he'll go, let's get a daiquiri. And Jon Stewart said, God, he sounds like a temp, And Jon Stewart said, something tells me that you guys don't stand around, under a poster of one of those hanging cats. It's a little more sophisticated than that. But we used to call it murderer's row when Sapphire is there, but David Brooks is such a sweetie pie. We've kind of, suspended that. But why don't you come have coffee and I'll show you what it's like. Okay.
Before we leave this theme, tell the story about during the early days of the Monica Lewinsky story when Bill Sapphire came into your office.
Oh, I forgot about that.
This is collegial, you know.
Yeah, so, when the Starr report came out, and Jill and I were poring over it, and it was just complete bodice-ripping, heavy breathing stuff that made you really worried about Ken Starr. And and I passed by Sapphire's office, and he was in there with the Starr report on his lap, reading it very studiously. And he said, "Maureen, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "What?" And he goes, "What is a thong?" And I said, "Well," and I tried to explain it to him, but I was turning redder and redder, and finally he goes, "Oh, I get it. This is what, in my reckless youth in Union City, New Jersey, they called a G-string or something." I said, "Well, sort of." And then he goes, "I just needed to know if it was a noun or an adjective."
Hi again. My question for you is, how much of your own reporting do you still do for your column? And to the extent that you don't, what criteria do you use to decide whether the reporting is valid for you to base your opinions on?
That's a great question, especially in the era of blogs. But, in an ideal world, I would love to do all my own reporting, and I try to do as much reporting as I can. But the problem is that, and I found this even when I was a political reporter, if you kind of if you think that you're going to tell the reader the truth every time and not shave anything off so you don't make your sources mad, you pretty quickly lose sources. And I think basically I have no sources. So, but, I try. Like I tried today to call and, get an interview with Giuliani to see if he could tell me about his week as a Red Sox fan. But they quickly came back with the answer that he was very, very busy. But, I try, and then once in a while, I'll get an interview, and I do report. I loved it. I loved the part of my career where I could just go and interview someone. Like one time I was interviewing Jimmy Carter, and I don't know why, for some reason I said something about, "Have you ever written poetry?" He goes, "Oh, you have to hear my peace poetry." And he went and he began reading me poems and telling me like which women who were married to, world leaders that he had lust in his heart for. I mean, I'd be perfectly happy just to be a fly on the wall and never have my own voice again. I'm much happier with other people's voices. That's why I love giving it to Stephen Colbert, because it's just more fun to hear, for me, what other people think, which probably means I need a new job, but...
My name is Roy Willie. I'm a junior at the college. In 1988, you and other newspaper columnists around the country effectively helped to disrail Joe Biden's presidential campaign. And this time, one of those same newspapers has made him the first candidate on either side to get an official newspaper endorsement. And assuming from your talk you said that you think policies and people who enact them are braided very closely. So my question to you is, if that newspaper got it wrong once and is getting it possibly right this time, how can the public trust newspapers to endorse, and should newspapers endorse candidates?
God, I don't know. We're not allowed to endorse, so I don't really, Tom Friedman's always writing about who he's not voting for. But I don't know about endorsements. I know, I was actually, I wrote those Biden stories, but this time, Sapphire had this expression, never kick anyone when they're down, only when they're up. So I called Biden and asked him if he wanted to do like a nice interview, and he was very leery, but finally he did it, and he was pleased with how it came out. But, basically, I believe everybody deserves a second chance because I've made every mistake on earth, and I'm talking at Harvard, so.
As an aspiring editorialist and a huge fan of your columns, I just first want to say thank you for coming tonight. And I have a question for you relating to the audacity, if you will, of American newspapers. As a student from France, at home I used to read newspapers which were extremely critical of governments and some which were very partisan on one side or the other. And although the excellence of your reporting and that of the New York Times and other newspapers does on occasion point out enormous discrepancies in policy by the Bush administration. I was wondering, do you think that kind of self-restraint that we see in the US versus in Europe is something that's inherent to American journalism, or is it something that, is it a practical access to information problem that was put in place by the Bush administration, and how do you see that evolving?
Well, I think, when I started covering the White House, Sam Donaldson was on the beat. And so he would be kind of rude and feisty with Reagan, and Reagan loved it because it was kind of like shootout at the OK Corral, and and he could take on Sam. But Sam served the purpose of having somebody who was an agitator. And then after 9/11, I just think the thing about the press is we're citizens. And this guy got at the patriotic question earlier. And the press, I think was a little cowed at first and didn't quite know how to respond after 9/11 either, and how tough to be. And it took us a while to sort through that. And it was really funny because when the British press would come over for a Tony Blair Bush press conference, the British press would seem so rude, because they had never gotten in this sort of more polite culture. But I think that the US press has bounced back now. I just think that 9/11 was a trauma for all of us, and it just took a while to figure out, and I think we learned a lesson the hard way, that at times like that, that's when you have to be more vigilant about the government, because they have more power and more backing from the public, so you have to make sure they're not abusing that.
My name's Greg Wilson. I'm a mid-career graduate from last spring. In '03, there's two stories that made waves from anonymous sources. One was the Novak piece. The second was written by Dana Priest, which said that the leaking of Valerie Plame's name was an act of, quote, pure revenge. And over the next 3 years, there's big debates within journalistic circles and at conferences about when it was appropriate to reveal an anonymous source. And most of those conferences, people would say maybe two instances: when there was a ticking time bomb, or if it had to do with troop movements. With the Scooter Libby trial, we found out under sworn testimony that the CIA briefer for Vice President Cheney informed him that people will be in grave danger with the identity of Valerie Plame being revealed, and that he said they could be tortured or killed. So I was wondering, the next time there's a journalistic conference, do you think that there'll be 3 cases where reporters will be willing to reveal their anonymous source?
Rick, do you want to help me out here? Come.
It's meant to be a bit provocative.
One of you guys has to, come on. Can you? Can somebody help me answer this? Well, because it's more of a news source kind of question, I think.
I'm not going to put Jill on the spot on this.
I didn't mean to be.
This is a delicate question, and I don't know that Maureen is really able to answer except in her own opinion.
Well, I think that it comes up more often on the news side, so I thought maybe
just from an opinion side, it can be.
Get some help up here.
This is Jill Abrams, the managing editor of the New York Times, who came to surprise her friend Maureen Dowd.
I'm going to answer your question in a slightly different way, which is, I think, the fulcrum of anonymous sources right now is coming in the proliferation of these criminal leak investigations that the Bush administration is pursuing. The Plame case took up a lot of oxygen, but there are efforts inside the government to try to root out who the New York Times sources are on a number of sensitive stories, including the NSA eavesdropping story, a very important story that we published. They've been poking around disturbingly on Dana's turf, and that's really, I think, the most worrisome of the developments in terms of puncturing the relationship between journalists and sources inside the government who are trying to shed light on information that they think is important to bring before the public. And the Bush administration's effort to put a freeze on that process, which I think is a really disturbing trend.
Thanks, Jill. We're going to take 3 more quick questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. I'm Tony Leon. I'm a fellow at the Institute of Politics. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not American. But given your acute observations about the condition of political leadership here, do you think it's possible, given the exigencies of the campaign cycle here, the length of time, the intrusive nature of the media, to actually campaign and thereafter govern without the gross pandering to which you draw attention, without losing your authenticity, and without forsaking your principles? Do you think in the practical realpolitik of today and tomorrow that is actually achievable?
Now, I hate to do this again, but Rick, you have to come up here. Rick is our most brilliant political editor and reporter. Just come for a second. I'll answer too, but you have to help me out here.
Can you answer first? That would be, and then I'll go.
No, you first.
Okay. You're asking, can politicians still be genuine? Is that
Yeah,
even...
and do you see any examples of it today? I mean, in the United States, of people who stick to principles, are genuine, and can be elected and govern effectively without doing all the omissions and commissions to which Maureen Dowd so effectively draws our attention?
I think the American public and voters just want people they feel they can trust, and no matter what we write about them, we're just trying to get at the truth and to expose them for who they are, good and bad. And I think we just want to get at what's real. And I think anyone, and I think that's a service to the public, to the voting public, when we're able to do that. And I think if a politician can survive the scrutiny and get elected, then sure, they can govern as themselves and get elected. Does that answer your,
yes,
sort of?
Probably what you're asking is, after they go through this whole process, are they too crazy to govern? I don't know. I don't agree with this whole philosophy when politicians start saying, journalists drive good people away from the process because they're too intrusive. I think that's a bunch of baloney. I think that the American public, some of the smartest pieces we do are what we call voices pieces, where we just go out and interview people about the race. And the American public just has a wonderful sense of, who they trust and who they don't, and who they like and who they don't. And sometimes they get fooled, but I think that they can only judge by what they have at hand. And then when they get fooled, then they correct that. So I don't worry about driving good people out. I think if you have good people, that they can triumph in the system.
Yes.
Hi. Do you still see sexism as an issue for reporters today?
I never like to use the word sexism, actually, but we just went through the revival of the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill thing with Clarence Thomas's book, and she wrote a piece for the Times Op-Ed page. And
you had a good column.
And it's like I just think that relations between the sexes are complicated and have gone on a very complicated trajectory where Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan told us it was going to be easy, and then it turned out not to be easy. But, I have great faith that we'll muddle through all that with humor. Yeah, of course there are problems, but we're stuck with each other until they come up with another species. So.
Final question.
Yes. As a longtime admirer of your work, I realize you're an equal opportunity kibitzer. But do you put the sins of Bill Clinton on a par with that of George W. Bush? And if not, do you feel any obligation to put it in perspective?
Yeah, there's this is something that still comes up a lot, and there was a piece about Al Gore in a recent Vanity Fair. And, the issue is, should reporters have been more direct in trying to explain that Al Gore's woodenness was not on a par with W's stupidness? And, I wrote about both, but I did an interview with W. The day he announced in Kennebunkport, and I said, how do you feel about running for president with no foreign policy experience whatsoever? And he said, well, you know, I have people around, Wolfowitz, Condi, Powell, that I'll just ask. And I'll trust my gut. Now, everyone read that interview, and they could judge if they wanted to go with that or not, and what that said about him, that he was so incurious and running for president without any experience. But I think that, you know, how a candidate manages his campaign just has a lot to do with whether he gets to be president. And Gore's management of his campaign was not brilliant. And it isn't, I don't think that reporters make a moral equivalency, but I'm not a partisan writer and our reporters aren't partisan, so we're not going to cover up the fact that he's doing something, you know, stupid if he is. We're just going to write about it, and then it's up to the voters to decide. But, you know, as Hal Raines used to say, if reporters had so much influence, Ronald Reagan never would have been president. I think sometimes our influence is really overrated. But all we can do is, you know, report, and that stuff is important because it turns out to be determinant factors about whether they win or not. And if they're reading, maybe they can learn something and switch, you know.
Maureen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Tomorrow at 8:30 on the top floor of this building, my colleague and friend Tom Patterson, who is the acting director of the Shorenstein Center while I'm on leave, will be moderating a panel on the election. And we've got a terrifically high-powered panel for you. Dana, for one, will be present. Charlie Cook, who's the publisher of the Cook Political Report, Tom Fiedler, who's a Shorenstein Fellow and the former editor-in-chief of the Miami Herald, Mark Halperin, who's one of the, you know, terrific political commentators of our time, Steve Jardling, who is a pollster and a guy who, not a pollster, but a guy who is a campaign organizer and manager who really understands this world very well, and Marion Just, a shrewd scholar from Wellesley who understands this world very well as well. That will be upstairs. We hope that many of you will come. I want to again thank Maureen and Dana for being here, and thank the Nyans and Walter and Arthur for helping persuade Maureen to come. Thank you all very much.